Boker Tov, Shalom Aleichem, everyone. Welcome back to the Aliyah day. We are in Parshat Miketz, and in this Parshat, we find the ascent of Yosef from prison, and he's going to come out from prison and interpret dreams of Pharaoh, and subsequently be elevated to really the highest position in the land, sometimes referred to as Viceroy of Egypt, but for all intents and purposes, he is the king, the Pharaoh, as it were, of Egypt. And really, there's not much that distinguishes Yosef from Pharaoh, which is all part of a pattern here. I've titled today's class, The Resurrection or the Messiah Resurrected, because that's really the pattern that's being shown in this opening scene. But we're going to learn today and this week, in fact, that more of the patterns of the Messiah, and it's going to help us understand our role as Lapid Jews, why God has us in this particular time and place, why you were born here, why I was born here, why we exist here, what we're supposed to be doing here. And also going to answer a question, why is it that today, in today's day and age, the majority of Jewish people do not believe in the Messiah? Why is that the case? Does that prove or disprove the Messiah's validity? We're also going to talk about today a discussion of something that's very commonly taught. I've heard anti-missionaries, we've talked about anti-missionaries last week or so, talk about this, and that is that a Messiah that comes and, fails is obviously not the Moshiach, right? So a man shows up, let's say, declares he's the Messiah, but then he dies before he can fulfill what he's supposed to do as the Moshiach. There have been other examples of this. Or maybe he comes to be the Moshiach, but then he does something else. He converts maybe to another religion, and therefore he's not the Moshiach. And so the anti-missionaries will tell you that according to Judaism, when that happens, obviously he's not the Moshiach. We're going to find out today, though, if that's actually true. We're going to look at Jewish history as it related to certain messianic figures and find out if the people at that time believe that to be true. And I'm sure you can probably guess the answer already, right? But the pattern of this is going to be found in the story of Joseph in general and in today's Parshat in particular. So we have a lot to get to. There's a lot to discuss. Of course, there's a whole discussion about dreams, because today's Aliyah is preceded by the cupbearer, the baker, who had a dream. They dreamed a dream, an impossible dream. Well, not really impossible, but they dreamed a dream, and Joseph interpreted the dream, and the baker lost his head. And then the cupbearer was restored to his position, and then forgot about Yosef, which is discouraging. But then there's a whole discussion about that too. We'll touch on that a little bit. And then, of course, later when Pharaoh has his dream, the cupbearer says, "Oh yeah, by the way, there was this guy in prison," which, by the way, is remarkable, right? So you're in prison. You're as far as back in antiquity, when you got sent to prison, I mean, you were there for the rest of your life, which probably wasn't going to be very long, with all the torture and the poor living conditions. You're probably going to catch some type of disease and die. But anyway, you're going to be there for the rest of your life. And so the fact that you would have a dream, this Hebrew slave would interpret your dream, that dream would come true, you'd be restored to your royal position, and then you would forget about the Hebrew slave. I mean, that is remarkable. How do you forget that? How does that, there was something, how did I get back here? There's something happened. See, I was in jail, and now it's this, there was this, I can't remember. It's crazy, right? But it's all part of divine plan. and it's really interesting. And so we're gonna touch on that. But I did a teaching on dreams and the meaning of dreams and the interpretation of dreams. And you can find that in last year's teaching, I believe. Just go to the channel later and Google, or not, I always say Google. I guess I'm just, anyway, not Google, but you use the search tool on the channel and just put in dreams and it should pop up. So, okay. All right. Enough about that. Good. Oh, by the way, we're raising money for our digital sign. Katura sent me a number. I want to say that we are like 4,500 or 4,700, something like along those lines. So just shy of $5,000, which is remarkable because we've only been raising money for like a week. And so we are now at this juncture needing about $25,000. You see what happens, right? So, and as I said before, when we have what we need for this project, when we have the finances that you guys have donated, we will stop collecting for it. We do that on everything. Whenever we have a special fundraiser and, that fundraiser is complete, like the last, finances have been donated for it, we stopped raising money for that, right? I can tell you that doesn't always happen in a lot of organizations, but it happens here, okay? So for those of you who have not yet contributed, remember, your $50, your $100, your $20, your $1,000, all of it matters. And so please donate and help us reach our goal. Good morning, Jubilee. Glad you're here. Good morning, Peaches. Formula from Georgia. Glad you're here. Good morning, Hepzibah. Donna Jones, Zakin Yagal. Good morning. Shoshana Brenner. Glad you're here. Samuel. Good morning to you, sir. Glenn Boker Tov. Ariella Rafaela. Good morning to you. Gianna Grace. Good morning. Ellie. Good morning. Hope you and Joseph and the kids are doing great. Seth Boker Tov to you. Running a little behind, Seth. Look at all these people that got in front of you this morning. Woo, you must be busy this morning. Good morning, Wendy. Good morning to Leah. Good morning to you. Hope you and Shmuel are doing great. Andrew DeLeon. Good morning, sir. Chanel from beautiful Cincinnati, Ohio. Good morning. Keturah Boker Tov. Emmanuel Boker Tov. Hepzibah. Good morning, Shoshana. Rebbetzin. The Rebbetzin. Good morning, honey. Good morning to Chris and Crystal. And Keturah Boker Tov. Let's see. Sarah Merritt. Hope you and Shane are doing great. Jeff White. Good morning to you, sir. David White. Good morning to you. And Donna. No, I said good morning, Donna. Lantern Lights. Boker Tov. Brenda Jones. Good morning. Johan. Good morning. Sergio. Glad to see you, sir. Hope you are doing well and your beautiful family. Milka. Hope you and Daniel are doing great with little Zara. Oh. Melanie McGreer. Good morning to you. Amita. Boker Tov. Hope you and Pinkus are doing great. And who else do we have? Makaya, good morning to you. Geneva, Boker Tov. Michael, good morning to you. Kathy, Boker Tov. Levi, hope you're doing great. Nellie Grace, Boker Tov. Kathy Castaneda, good morning to you. Zakin Rayford, good morning, sir. And Grace, good morning from the beautiful United Kingdom, the homeland of Keturah. Good morning, Thelma. And who else do we have? Shoshana Keith. Good morning. Hope you and Yaakov are doing great. Oh, Keturah said $4,757. Okay, great. So we're just shy of the $5,000 mark. And so that's awesome. Thank you guys for contributing. Please be sure and contribute. Who else do we have? Brooke and Daniel. Good morning, Daniel. Good to see you, sir. And on Facebook, we have Alita. Good to see you, Alita. Boker Tov to you. All right, so let's look into this concept. I'm going to begin this morning by looking at the introduction to this parsha from the Chumash. Okay, let's begin with this idea that if the Messiah, if somebody comes to say they're the Messiah, and then they die, or what have you, or we'll talk about another scenario here in a minute, but let's just stick with death. They die, then, obviously they're not the Messiah. Duh. I mean, this is what Judaism teaches. Hello, McFly. Yeah, I mean, no brainer. The guy said he's a Messiah, died, didn't do what the Messiah came to do. So, hello. Is that really true? No. I was having, as many of you know, I've talked before that I took some yeshiva classes once from the Dallas Area Torah Association. It's called Data. Here in Dallas, obviously, which is why it's called the Dallas one, as opposed to the Houston one. Anyway, took some courses down there. I developed a relationship with a Orthodox rabbi who's used to be a teacher there, but now he's moved on to do some other things. I think he actually moved out of state. But anyway, it's a long story how we developed a relationship. Very interesting story though. But that's neither here nor there. It's not this. That's not for today. But so I took classes there. It was very interesting, and I appreciate the opportunity to take classes. It's very remarkable that I was invited. But he and I used to have lunch back in the day. We had 2 or 3 times we met together and did that. But one time we were having lunch, and I had the opportunity that we just talked about different things, and I asked him. It was a serious question because I wanted to know, because this rabbi was very learned, and I asked him if there was any sources, any citations, whereby it indicated that Rabbi Akiva had repented for declaring that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. Was there anywhere that he said, I was wrong or what have you, right? Because you would think that'd be a pretty big thing. Now, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, good morning, Timothy. Baruch HaShem. Hey, good morning, Steve. Glad you're here. I didn't read what you have said here. 3.5 years ago. That's great, Steve. Hey, Steve, stick around. You're going to learn some stuff today. Baruch HaShem. So listen, those of you who don't know about the Bar Kokhba Rabbi Akiva thing, Bar Kokhba in the beginning of the beginning of the 2nd century was declared to be the Moshiach. Okay, and he led this big military revolt against Rome, and was subsequently, by the way, defeated. And that's really where the exile came from. This was after the destruction of the Second Temple. Well, at the time, the perhaps one could argue, one of the biggest sages, one of the biggest rabbis at the time was Rabbi Akiva, who today is still considered a tremendous, sage, tzaddik, and so forth and so on. At the time, he was perhaps one of the biggest. Okay. Good morning, Melinda. In any case, it was Rabbi Akiva who declared that Bar Kokhba was the Moshiach. Okay. That's a pretty big deal. Do you agree? I mean, to declare somebody the Moshiach by a sage of that stature is a pretty substantial thing to have happen, right? Okay. So he did. And of course, the story goes, good morning, Sylvia from Brazil. Glad you're here. The story goes that Bar Kokhba led this rebellion, and Nero was at Bayar, I think it was, that he was slain in battle and was killed. Subsequently, the Romans arrested Rabbi Akiva, and they essentially tortured him to death in a very, very gruesome way. And he was dying, and he was surrounded by his Talmudim. And of course, there's stories about how in his last moments, he cried out, the Shema and so forth and so on. But what is interesting to me in this topic is that in his last moments, there's no record of Rabbi Akiva saying to his Talmudim that he was wrong, that he made tshuva to say that that Bar Kokhba was not the Moshiach, and we're still looking for the Moshiach or what have you, right? And I asked this of Rabbi Nathan when we were having lunch, and he thought for a moment, and he said, "I'm not aware of any." And so I subsequently presented this to him, what I'm telling you, and he didn't really have an answer. It was in his mind at the time, it was just kind of an interesting contemplation. But my point is that don't you think that if the idea that the Messiah dying is obviously a deal breaker? I mean, clearly, if the Messiah dies, then he can't be the Messiah, right? Right, of course. Hello. But wait, Bar Kokhba died, and Rabbi Akiva had the opportunity to declare that he was mistaken, but he did not. My question to you, my question to Rabbi Nathan at the time was why? Why not? And the answer is very easy. It's very simple. Okay. It's because the Messiah is supposed to die. So it wasn't like a big shocker. Okay. The Messiah is supposed to come as the suffering Messiah and die, interestingly enough, in battle. Of course, it's a spiritual battle, not a literal battle. It's a spiritual battle, but nevertheless, he dies in battle. Why? In order to pay for the sins of Israel. Hello, that's what the sources say. Okay, it's interesting because I've watched some rabbis and so forth. This one particular one that somebody had mentioned to me, and I went and watched his thing on Messiah ben Yosef, and it's ladies and gentlemen, you have to be careful. One thing I don't do here, I really don't, and that is I don't give you sources I like and withhold sources I don't like. Yeah, I don't do that. We examine all the sources, okay? And what you'll find in other settings is that they just present the sources that they agree with. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that's called gaslighting. So it's real easy for me to say, well, this is a belief of Messiah ben Yosef, but I don't ever tell you the other idea either, right? It's like somebody sent me an article this over the weekend. It was like, well, Jews believe that the third temple is actually going to be built by human hands, and the idea that it's going to come from heaven actually came from Christianity. When I heard that, I laughed out loud. All right, they sent me this article. So I read the article, which actually was a Jewish article. The Jewish article was quoting, who do you think they were quoting? Come on, really quickly. Who do you think the article was quoting? What commentator do you think they were quoting to come to this conclusion? Anybody? Keturah, Rambam. Yes. Remember, Rambam has an issue with the supernatural. Remember? No, it's a Jewish article. They wouldn't be quoting Paul. They were quoting the Rambam, who evidently taught. I didn't really know this, to be fair. I didn't know this, but the Rambam evidently believed that the third temple is going to be just built by human hands. But then again, that makes total sense because Rambam doesn't believe in anything supernatural, seemingly. Anyway, I shared with this person an article from another Jewish source that points out that there's whole lot of sages, a whole lot of belief, Rashi as an example, who believed it was going to come from Shemayim. And the idea that the temple coming from Shemayim is rooted in Christianity is frankly silly, laughable. Why is it laughable? Because Christianity doesn't even want the third temple, right? Where do we hear, by the way, the third temple is going to come from heaven? It actually comes from the book of Revelation, which is written by one of the true 12, John, who's bringing down a Jewish idea. Anyway, the point, going back to this point, that's what happens when you only get one side of the conversation, okay? If you only get one side of the conversation, you're led to believe that according to Rambam, I mean, the temple is not going to come from the heaven. So where does the idea from coming down from heaven come from? Oh, the Christians. You see how that happens? You see, I can really easily manipulate you by only giving you one side of the conversation, right? happens all the time when you're having somebody who says, well, this happened and that happened, but you don't know the other side of the story, right? You're easily manipulated. It's called gaslighting you. So anyway, going back to this whole thing, we don't do that here. We give you both sides and we discuss. And the reason I like to do that is because I like to debate the other argument, the other side of the argument, right? By the way, Rambam believes in a third temple built by human hands. Why is that impossible? Because nothing built by human hands lasts forever. I mean, there's other arguments to be made about that, but that's neither here nor there. Going back to this conversation, the Messiah ben Yosef is supposed to come and die. So Rabbi Akiva never denounced Bar Kokhba from being the Messiah. You know why? Because he didn't think he wasn't. There's another messianic figure, one of the most prominent in Jewish history, is Shabtai Zvi. Everybody believed that Shabtai Zvi was the Messiah. Everybody, back in the late 1600s. Everybody, the whole Jewish world, okay? Again, there'll be people who try to gaslight you and tell you, no, it's not really true. No, it's true, okay? What's interesting is that Shabtai Zvi converted to Islam, which of course is horrible. What is, however, more interesting is that, yes, when that happened, that was a huge blow to Judaism and their faith in Shabtai Zvi, and there were some people who no longer believed in him. But what's interesting is that there was a fairly significant contingent of people who continued to believe in Shabtai Zvi even after he converted to Islam. And then he eventually died. And there grew a sect called the Frankists out of that, who believed that Frank was a resurrected Shabtai Zvi, a reincarnated Shabtai Zvi. And the Frankist was a fairly significant Jewish sect for a long time. That there were, of course, anti-missionaries back in the 1700s who fought against the Frankists. Now you say, well, wasn't Bar Kokhba and wasn't Shabtai Zvi, weren't they false messiahs? Well, of course they were. In fact, an anti-missionary one time was having a debate with a pastor, and he asked the pastor why Bar Kokhba and Shabtai Zvi were false messiahs, and the pastor said, because they died. And of course, he fell right into the trap. It's a trap of the anti-missionary rabbi who was debating him. And the anti-missionary rabbi just looked at him like, hello. Right, but that's not why they were false messiahs. Death doesn't make you a false messiah. Converting to Islam doesn't make you a false messiah. Now, I do happen to think that, but the point I'm trying to make is, why didn't they think that? Because of what I'm about to tell you. There's a pattern, it says here, that emerges from the events that we see. It says here in the Chumash. And that is that one of descent is followed by illusory ascent. In other words, the idea is the Messiah must descend in order to ascend. In fact, with the case of Shabtai Zvi, the idea was, okay, he converted to Islam. We didn't see that coming. But his followers who continued to believe in him said, oh, I know what's going on. He has to do that in order to go and collect the holy sparks that exist in Islam. Now, they rationalized it, right? I'm not saying they were correct, but what I am saying is that there's this idea in Judaism that the Messiah has to go down low in order to come back up. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay? All right? What's interesting too is that the commentary here, or it's commentary to the introduction of Parshat Miketz from the Chumash, is pointing out, okay, that that part of this whole experience that Joseph is going through is ultimately about bringing Esau into the covenant and joining forces with Esau. Remember, Esau is a euphemism for Christianity. Now, before we get there, let me just say this other part about what we learned. So in this parasha, Pharaoh has a dream. He dreams about the fat cows and the skinny cows. Nobody can answer his dreams. And then the cupbearer says, oh yeah, I forgot. There was this Hebrew in the jail who interpreted my dream and the dream of the baker, and they both came to pass, and the baker was killed, and here I stand. Now, there's some really insight about that, by the way, that it had been 2 years since that happened. And the reason, some of the sages bring down that the reason that Joseph was left to languish in prison for 2 more years is because he put his trust in the cupbearer as opposed to putting his trust in HaShem, in so much as he told the cupbearer, remember me when you are restored to your post, remember me. Now, from a human point of view, it's not really it's kind of a small thing, but we're dealing here with a Zaddik. And so they're held to a higher standard. And so Joseph, in that moment, put his trust in the cupbearer, not in HaShem. And so the insights bring that down. Okay. But so that's what, so then what happens is that when Pharaoh finds out that there is somebody in the prison who could possibly answer the riddle of these dreams, he summons Yosef. And therefore, Yosef is brought up from the prison representing Sheol, Gehenna, hell, death. And so in this moment, what we see is a rise to power by Joseph, which is really a type and shadow of the resurrection. And this also occurs on Rosh Hashanah, which is when the rabbis say, and I do believe and agree, that the resurrection of the dead will occur on Rosh Hashanah. Okay? Now, then, of course, in tomorrow's Aliyah, we really see where Yosef is placed into the position of viceroy. And we'll talk about it more that way, more about that later. But what I'm about to mention next is actually going to be a theme we'll touch on and throughout the week. But what's really more remarkable is that here in the first and second Aliyah, and then of course particularly in the third Aliyah, we see the resurrection of the Messiah, if you will. Remember that in the Midrash, Yosef is referred to as the savior of the world. Okay. And so we see the resurrection of the Messiah, the one who's going to literally save the Jewish people. Okay. Literally. Okay. But what's interesting is that he's resurrected to new life. Okay. He becomes the king. But nobody knows. No, the only people who know it are the Egyptians. The Jews don't know or don't recognize that he's been resurrected. Do you see the pattern here? The only people who see the resurrected Moshiach are the Goyim. Okay, and there's a reason for this, as we're about to dive into. Now, something else that's remarkable. Okay. Let me just say this before I get to the remarkable part. Okay. Right now you have Christians, all Christians, but to include Messianics, who believe that their mission is to go and reach the Jewish people, right? They're desperate to get Jews saved. Okay. Of course, they'd be pulling them into a false religion because Christianity, we don't want Jews to become Christians because we don't want Jews celebrating Christmas or Easter or Halloween. We don't want them eating pork and, throwing the law under the bus. That's actually the opposite direction. That's the way to hell, not to heaven. So we don't want that to happen. But there are people who believe, and Messianic Judaism teaches this, to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. Got to reach the Jews, which is why Messianic Judaism exists. It exists as a missionary arm of the church to reach Jews for Christ. Okay. Where does that idea come from? Paul. It comes from Paul. Okay. Now, which is the source of all false theology, actually. But what do we see? This is remarkable. What do we see in the pattern? Okay. So the Messiah is resurrected to new life. He becomes the king of the world. Remember, at that time, for all intents and purposes, Egypt is the world, which is why the Midrash Ramban refers to him as the savior of the world. Okay. No, the Jews don't know that. They don't recognize him as for who he is. And he has a name that isn't Jewish. We'll find out about that tomorrow. He doesn't look Jewish. You have to know he probably looks pretty Egyptian, I can imagine. But what's even more remarkable than that, okay, is that at this juncture, Joseph has been separated from his brothers for a long time. Decades. By the time it's all said and done, it's something to the effect of 20 or 22 years. During that time of separation, a significant part of that time, Joseph is sitting on the throne of Egypt, and he is the all-powerful one, which, by the way, I forgot to mention another pattern. Again, this is tomorrow, but Pharaoh's going to say to Joseph, the only thing that separates you from me is the throne. So another pattern is that when we're looking at the Messiah, Joseph, it's as if you're looking at the king, Pharaoh. They're indistinguishable. In fact, at one point, the people complain to Pharaoh and say, he's telling us to do this. And Pharaoh says, whatever he tells you to do it. So we see a pattern there where the Messiah is going to be indistinguishable from the king. Why? Because the Moshiach is the king manifest. Which, by the way, is a Jewish idea about the throne of David anyway, that the Davidic king on earth is really the representation, manifestation of God in heaven. Some of you didn't know that, but that's actually what Judaism teaches. Now, going back to this topic, one of the most curious and most remarkable things is that Joseph comes to power, sitting on the throne, has all the power in the world that he could possibly need or have or want. And he makes no effort to tell his brothers, I'm alive, or his father. Zero effort. There's no letter sent. There's no email sent. He doesn't send out a tweet. He doesn't put a Facebook post up. He doesn't send out a picture on Instagram. There is nothing. He makes zero effort. He doesn't send couriers. He makes zero effort to inform his family that, oh, by the way, I am A, alive, and B, I'm ruler of the world. He makes zero. He allows his father to continue to think that he's dead. He allows his brothers to continue to think that he's dead and that they were right. He makes zero effort to contact them. Zero, nada, zilch, nothing. That's astounding. Why? Because the insights will bring down that it wasn't time yet, and that he needed to wait until the proper time so that when his identity was made known to them, that they would be in a position to make teshuvah. Okay? If he said it prior, it wasn't going to work. The reason the Jews don't believe in the Messiah today is because of the gospel of the church, which is completely false. That's why. That's the reason today. If Christians wringing their hands out there and go, why can't they believe? It's because the church gospel. I had a gentleman this week or last week, actually. He was trying to witness to me, but he was doing it very nicely. I get it. And he said, anyway, I won't go into the way in which he was trying to roundabout witness to me. But he was like, the reason that the Jews don't accept JC. And I said, oh, really? Why do you think so? He said, because he's because he's divine, and they couldn't wrap their head around that. I didn't say anything to him. What I would like to have said was, that's actually not the reason. But I just gave him my card and I said, hey, send me your thoughts. Let's have a conversation about that. He didn't know, of course, I believed in the Messiah, but that's actually not the reason. The reason that Judaism rejects the Messiah is because he's not Jewish, as far as they're concerned. He leads people into debauchery. Debauchery meaning not following the law of Moses, which is, in fact, according to the Bible, debauchery. And by the way, idolatry. I mean, according to Deuteronomy 13, the Jesus of the church is, by biblical definition, a false Messiah. It's not a hard choice. Divinity is like down the road. We can get into that debate later. But the Jesus Christ of the church, this is just so listen, there are Christians who watch this program and you're watching because you know something's missing, you just don't know what. And that's how many people have gotten here. So thank you for being here. We're glad you're here. But here's the reality, okay? This is a Mr. Spock moment. Mr. Spock. Just emotion aside, okay? Nostalgia aside, right? We're just going to talk about facts. The Jesus Christ of the church, the way that he's presented, he ended the law and go eat a ham sandwich, keep Christmas. I mean, how many Christians, there was a gentleman here that I talked to not too long ago who said, and he's a Christian, loves God and all this, knows zero about Judaism. Zero. How is that even possible? You follow a Jewish Messiah, you read a Jewish book, all the heroes of the Bible are Jews, and when you die and go to heaven, you're going to live in the New Jerusalem. And yet you know nothing about Jews and Judaism. I mean, I understand and I know why, but the question is rhetorical. Okay. So in any case, the reality is that the Jesus Christ of the church, the gospel that's preached and the person of Jesus Christ, according to Deuteronomy 13, is by biblical definition a false Messiah. It's not hard. As a Jew, that's all you need, okay, to disqualify him. The Christian would stand up and say, he made all foods clean. You can eat whatever you want now. As a Jew who reads the Bible, I would say, is that true? Are you sure about that? And the Christian would say, absolutely. As the Jew said, oh, okay, well, that means he's a false Christ, right? According to the Bible. See, because the Bible tells us what to look for in the false Christ, and that's one of the things you see. You see what I'm saying? Right? So it's a big rut-row. And so this is the point. So, but going back to this other issue here, okay? Why doesn't Joseph reach out to his brothers? It's incredible. So today we see a pattern, right? The Messiah is not making himself known to the Jews. And we will see at the end of this whole story, of course, it is the Messiah who will make himself known personally to the Jewish people. Not to say that there won't be Jewish people like us who believe in the Messiah, but we're the remnant. We're not talking here about the remnant. We're talking about the whole nation, okay? But who is the Messiah making himself known to? The Gentiles. In the story of Joseph, again, this is down the road, but in the story of Joseph, we're going to learn something remarkable. And that is that Joseph tells the Gentiles, you want bread? Yes, we do. Great. Get circumcised. Circumcision being a general term for conversion. He wouldn't let anybody buy bread unless they were circumcised. Did you know that? So what do we see here? We see the pattern being that the Messiah is making himself known to the Gentiles, to Esau. That's the stage of the game in which we are in right now, ladies and gentlemen. That's where we are right now. We're at the point in the end time movement of history that the Messiah is finally making himself known, his true identity, to the Gentiles who surround him. Now, later we're going to find out. I keep saying later because, I've got the whole story in my head here. Later, we're going to find out that Jacob sends his sons to Egypt. Why? And this is all brought down in the sources. We're going to hopefully get to some of this stuff. He says, because I've heard that there's hope in Egypt. There's something about Egypt. Jacob hears some rumblings of what's going on. You got this guy sitting on the throne and he's telling everybody, if you want bread, you got to get circumcised. What? Nobody was getting circumcised except for Jews. So what's the pattern here? What do we see now? We see that in the end days, what's going to start to raise the eyebrows of the house of Jacob is when they see and hear that Gentiles are legitimately turning to the legitimate Moshiach, legitimately by embracing Judaism. Ladies and gentlemen, Christianity has been around for nearly 2,000 years. It hasn't done anything. You know, you look at a country like Jamaica. No offense to Jamaicans here, but I happen to have a lot of personal experience with Jamaica. A lot. And the culture there is, I'm sorry to you Jamaicans who may be watching, but it's a horrible culture. Jamaican people are great. They're very sweet. The culture is a mess. The country's a mess. It is the picture of dysfunction. Crime through the roof. Immorality through the roof. I am talking about Jamaica, but this could apply to other places as well. Okay? And Jamaica is probably the most Christianized country on the planet. There is a church, there's 2 churches on every street corner. Okay? You can't talk to a Jamaican who hasn't heard about Jesus, I promise you, as they're selling drugs and involved in debauchery. It teaches us that message that's not the message that changes. What Jamaica needs, what everybody needs, is Torah law. Okay? And this is what's going on in these end days. And this is why you have so many Christians. It's never been like this in history. There have been little pockets of Lapid-like movements throughout history, but it's never like this, where you have Christians that are just disillusioned with Christianity. And they're like, something's not right here. And they start to read the Bible and don't do that. Listen, if you're a Christian and you're watching this program, if you want to remain a Christian, do not read your Bible. Don't do it. Don't read the Old Testament, the Tanakh. Don't read it. Do not read it. If you want to, I'm just telling you, if you start doing that, then you're going to start asking your pastor questions and you're going to get kicked out. It's a warning. Okay. If you just want to remain kind of like everything's great and happy, then don't read your Bible. Okay. And here's something else. Here's another warning. Do not ever read Paul critically and actually examine what he wrote in light of Scripture. Don't do that. Boy, I tell you, you start doing that and you're going to run into some real issues. So yeah, don't do that. Don't read Paul quick. Don't read Paul as if, like, for instance, don't read Paul and say, I wonder if what he's saying is actually correct, and read it from that point of view. You have to read him like everything he says is absolute, fact. You keep doing that. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. I'm being sarcastic here, but how many of you know what I'm saying is true? When you start reading your Bible and you start like looking at what Paul wrote and then saying, I wonder if what he said is accurate. And you go read what he wrote or read what he quoted, and you go back and actually read in context what he wrote. You're like, holy smokes. What he said is not even remotely correct. Yeah. That's where you start getting messed up. Okay. All right. I'm way over time already, but I wanted to point out all these patterns to you. Okay. But with that said, let me read a couple of paragraphs here to close us out. Okay, we have I gave you kind of the overview. Can always go back. Yeah, I'll save this insight. There's an insight here about Joseph and Hanukkah, but I'll save that for tomorrow. But let me read this. It's talking about the essence of exile, right? The essence of exile is living under the control of some power that deprives us of the freedom to live our lives as God would like us to. It is immaterial whether that power is political, social, or psychological, whether we submit to it willingly or unwillingly, whether we are physically located in our native country or not. Whatever the case, exile is the mentality that we must constantly seek the approval or bend to the will of another whose values are inimical to ours. Being in exile is thus the single most challenging obstacle to living up to our divine potential, fulfilling God's will, and following our life's true calling. That's true. We are in exile today. The culture of our exile is completely antithetical to that of Judaism and Torah. That's what makes it challenging. Now, some people would rather have comfort than truth. Some people would rather have compromise than conviction. Some people would rather just placate than have principle. And unfortunately, that's the vast majority of people. They don't want to be limited. And I will say that living a Torah life is about limitations, in a lot of different ways. But it depends on how committed you are to truth. Some people say, I'm very committed to truth. Very few people are, actually. There was a song back in the day, back in the church days, and it was like, yeah, it had a stanza, a bridge, as they say. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. And every time I heard that song, I used to laugh because it's yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, until until somebody reads the fine print. And it's like, oh, no, Lord, no, Lord, no, no, Lord. But anyway, it goes on to say here, as we have seen, when Jacob saw that Esau was not ready to join forces with him in the divine mission of making the world into God's home, he realized that refining Esau's energy and passion would be a long, arduous, and gradual process. In the course of the process, there would be times when Esau's descendants would gain the upper hand and Jacob's descendants individually and collectively would find themselves in physical or spiritual exile. In such times, it would be crucial for them to follow Joseph's example and to be able to thrive under the adverse conditions and eventually even triumph over them. So we have to be like Joseph, that we may be the only Jews in Egypt, but we got to live a Jewish life. Why? Because ultimately, our goal is to refine Esau, Christianity. Our goal, what's happening now in this end time movement is Christianity is being saved. Yeah. Christians are being saved. Christians' eyes are being opened. They're the ones who are blind. Christianity says the Jews are blind. No, ma'am. No, sir. It's Christians who are blind. And their eyes are being opened. And when Esau joins forces with Jacob, then the house of Jacob will be awakened. So, Mr. and Mrs. Christian, if you want to see the Jews get born again, you need to get born again as a Jew. That's the pattern. It goes on to say, this ability to achieve great heights in the face of adversity, as exemplified by Joseph, is alluded to in the name of the Parshat, Miketz, which means at the end. The word for end used here actually means extreme, and thus alludes to how evil, the lower extreme of the moral continuum, should elicit our inner strengths for good, the upper extreme of that continuum, inasmuch as the two extremes of any process are the beginning and its end. The word Miketz alludes not only to the end of exile, whether Joseph's exile in prison or our present personal and general exiles, but also to how this nexus itself becomes the beginning of redemption. As for Jacob, it goes on to say, the ultimate rectification of Esau will usher in the final redemption. Do you hear the words that are coming out of the mouth of the Kael Chumash? When Esau is rectified, when Christianity comes to its true Messiah and the true gospel, then the final redemption will occur. If you want to see the final redemption, if you want to see the Moshiach come, understand, ladies and gentlemen, listen to me. Listen. We learn in Zechariah, the Mashiach's going to come and appear, and the Jews are going to look upon him and say, and they're going to mourn for the one that they pierced. That's the final redemption. So we're seeing the pattern here, right? The Messiah reveals himself to his brothers. Okay? If you want to hasten that final redemption, Mr. and Mrs. Christian, then you need to embrace Yeshua, not Jesus. And you need to embrace the covenant, which is the law of Moses, not the fake and phony, non-existent law of Christ that Paul lied to you about. Okay? What has been holding back the final redemption is Esau is not rectified yet. And that's our goal. Okay? So it says here, thus transforming the extreme of evil into the opposite extreme of goodness by neutralizing our ego and remaining unwaveringly loyal to our divine mission will also transform the extreme of exile into the opposite extreme of redemption. The name of this Parshat, Miketz, thus alludes not only to the dynamic transformation that leads to redemption, but also to the redemption itself. The end of a long exile begins the messianic future, and that's what we're seeing. We are in the course of history right now. We are in Miketz, where the Messiah is being revealed to Esau, to the Gentiles. The Gentiles are coming to know their true Messiah, and they're being brought into the covenant of Torah. And then we will see the redemption of Jacob. Paul had it all wrong, and he had this in reverse, because his gospel was a false gospel. And the Satan knew what he was doing. That's why he had Paul to teach this false gospel, because he knew that if he could keep the Gentiles focused on trying to get the Jews pulled into a false religion, he could prevent the redemption, which would prevent him from being chained to hell and the lake of fire for all eternity. End of our Aliyah today. Please be sure and like this video, share it with all of your friends. Very important information here. Please be sure and donate to our digital sign campaign. Please. I believe that we're going to reach this goal by the end of January, and you are going to help us, and I thank you for that. And listen, have a great day. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Until we meet again, be blessed and be encouraged.